Hey everyone, welcome back to the next edition of the Liquid Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Karl Meisterheim, Shopify consultant, male model, and as always, joined by my co-host, Taylor Page, father, husband, aspiring male model. And today, we are really excited to welcome our guest, Griffin Caprio, who is the founder of No Fixed Plans. Griffin, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Glad to finally catch up with you guys.
Yeah. And you are in lovely Chicago, is that correct?
I am. Lovely Chicago. We have entered the 40 and rainy period season. So thankfully it's not negative 30 like it was a couple weeks ago. So I'll take it.
Oof.
Yeah, because you're pretty mobile, right? In terms of you do a lot of perambulation as opposed to driving. So walking around the city when it's that cold must be difficult.
Yeah, we've got a car. My wife works at a hospital not too far away, and so she kind of takes it a couple of miles. But me, every morning I have a kids carpool, and I take 4 kids under 8 on the subway, and so we pack up the Cheerios and head on the subway, and go to school. And so they really enjoy living in the city. So
that's cool.
That's awesome.
All right, well, as we get started,
to ride the bus. Sorry, Carl. I'll say my kids always ask to ride the bus, and I keep telling them how good it is that they don't have to ride the bus all the time. So I went through this period of time where every single time it rained or it was super cold outside, I'd point at the kids like we were passing, driving by, and be like, "See, aren't you happy you're not a bus rider?" And so now they've stopped asking if they can ride the bus. So it's my small dad win. But I bet after riding the subway to get to school, but that's for the little kids, at least, I'm sure when they're little, I'm sure that's amazing. They're like, this is awesome.
Yeah, I also, we've been raising our kids. We live right downtown, and you just interact with a lot more people than you do in a car. And so I teaching my kids to be around, some weird stuff, some happy stuff, and some keeping your eyes open kind of stuff, just the mix of interactions that you get kind of living in a city. There's something I think somebody said one time that the mark of an involved city is where the rich take public transportation, not that they have to, but that they get to, right? And so if you look all around the world, it's Japan, Mexico City, all this kind of stuff. I don't know. There's a little part of me that enjoys packing them up and getting them on the subway. Just a little part.
Yeah. So just a little part.
That's pretty cool. That's a good experience for sure. Why don't we jump into just catching up on what we've been up to recently? So Taylor, I'll have you go first since you haven't had a chance to talk much yet. What have you been up to recently?
Yeah, no. So since we're talking about the personal standpoint, kids going to school, kids are finally back in school. We had this terrible period of time with same thing here in Ohio, really, really cold temperatures, colder than what would be typical, especially with the wind chill. So we had the kids out of school a day here and there because of the wind chill, and even just concerned for those kids that do have to walk, ride the bus and stuff like that. And so even though they went back to school after the holidays and stuff like that, they actually had not experienced a full week back at school because of all these days off.
Oh, wow.
Last week, they went to school only one day last week. And so that's when the whole working from home thing really works against you because you're trying to get stuff done. And I've got 2 smaller kids. And so they're really great. They do a good job. If I have a meeting and close my door, they know not to bother dad, or something like that. I'm fortunate enough that I do have an office space to even be able to do that. But that made things just a little bit trickier. So I'm grateful that they are back. And even though it is the cold and rainy stuff, it's at least a little bit better where they're actually able to go to school. Felt bad for them though. At least if they're missing school, you would hope that, we can go play outside in the snow. We didn't have a whole lot of that. So as far as dev stuff, so it was kind of slow, at least kind of mid and end of December going into January, which I haven't typically experienced before in the past, but things have picked back up again. Just in addition to working with, the typical folks that I work with, just, other projects and stuff like that, like redesigns, builds and stuff like that. So that's nice that that's starting to pick back up. And then I've been doing a lot of pixels analytics, these DMARC updates that people have been having to make for, out of concern for email deliverability and stuff because of Google and Yahoo rules that are rolling out here in February. So a lot of non-dev but dev stuff that's just not the typical things that I get to work in. So that has been good, bad, indifferent, all across the board. Just learning something different, but also being grateful that that's not my everyday. So
That's nice. Griff, how about you? What have you been focused on work-wise or personal life the last couple of days or weeks?
Kids are back in school, which is awesome, as Taylor said, and we've been having some terrible weather, same, and so they're finally kind of back for their first full week this week, I think. So that's been great. We spent a lot of time traveling over the holidays, seeing family. So being at home now is kind of like nice to kind of be static. And then I'm right in the thick of kind of a major initiative for one of our products. And so we're adding pretty significant feature set to it. And we've been working on it since probably July. And this week we started with our first full kind of push into production, which is, for one of our biggest customers. And so that's been a little nerve-wracking, but also a lot very exciting because it means kind of like the end is in sight for this, kind of giant feature set.
Well, that sounds exciting. You've been working on it since July. That'll be a big win to actually get that moving forward.
Yeah, it's been tough because right now it's more of under the covers, so not many people know about it. It's very much like we have a very large enterprise pilot customer with it, and it's going very, very well. I think they think so too. And so it'll be nice when it gets launched to be able to kind of like publicly come out and announce it. And right now we're kind of just like, I'm having conversations with customers and they're mentioning this problem and I can't really say anything because it's not ready yet. And I'm just like, well, let's check in a couple weeks, maybe something will pop up. And so I'm excited to kind of go back to them.
Nice. Well, what I've been focused on since you asked, Taylor, I have a couple different things I'll share real quick. One is I finally had a little extra time and built myself a little desk for my walking treadmill. I'm in a lot more meetings these days, and so this has been a huge win just because I can't sit still for so long. So I had some wood that I bought for a project I never did years ago, and so I cobbled it into a desk. That was nice.
Nice. You made that yourself? Little pocket hole screws there.
Pocket screws and everything.
Very nice.
What's
a little bit of swearing.
Corner behind your laptop?
That's the console for the treadmill itself that you control the speed and stuff on.
Got it.
It's a
makes sense.
The lifespan. I got it on Facebook Marketplace, so it must be a nice one. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, the app apparently really stinks, but I use the console to control it. In addition to that, I've been doing some deep diving. So I've got a lot of people I work with that have line item scripts on Plus stores, and we're trying to get them ready to migrate over into Shopify functions, and just not had the headspace to really dive and figure out how the pieces fit together. So I finally did that. I feel like I got a pretty good handle on it for the most part. The one area I'm still kind of debating is how I want to handle it in terms of user customization. Because the nice thing about functions, right, is it's very similar to line item scripts. You write the code and it just lives in Shopify. You don't have to host it or anything. But then if you want to make it accessible to a merchant or whatever to actually tweak things on the fly, then you have to start looking into how do I provide some sort of interface for them to do that. Or do I just ask them to like hack a meta object and like read that, whatever. Or obviously you and I are very familiar with Gadget, and so that's one option is to go that route because then it's still self-hosted and you don't have to mess with all that. But so that's the next piece I want to figure out. But
so
functions,
kind of timely today, talking about probably the two differences between kind of the custom app route versus more of a public app route. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
It's almost like we planned it, which we didn't. So let's dive right into our Griffin life. So Griff, one of the things we like to do, well, we being me, I don't know if Taylor likes this or not, is whenever we start with a guest, I always like to hear kind of the hero origin story. It doesn't have to be super long, but we just love to hear how do you get into Shopify development? What was your course there and what's your focus? And then we'll dive into the meat.
Yeah, so software engineer kind of by background. I've been a variety of different things over the past, over my career. Everything from like hands-on keyboard founding engineer all the way up to, managing a couple hundred engineers for, a public company and kind of everything in between. And so a couple of years ago, I left a role that I had taken on, and I had always kind of TikTok between starting companies and joining companies. And so, I've started a couple companies in the past, and then, either closed or exited them, sold them, did a variety of different things, and then, kind of like join a company. And this time I decided, there was some like personal life stuff going on with my kids and things like that. And so I ended up just kind of like diving into an idea I had around e-commerce. I was always fascinated with Shopify. I like their ethos, at least like the story and the narrative. But I also saw an opportunity from an experience standpoint based on like my previous experience. And I thought Shopify was a great place to kind of maybe put it into practice. And so I dove in, spent about a year just helping launch brands, either everything from like, UI tweaks, like theme tweaks, all the way to like full blown custom app development. So I'm very experienced with application development, all sorts of different, programming languages and programming environments. And so I was able to kind of get in there and really just touch everything about Shopify, all the way from, the checkout API, the cart API, the admin API, the GraphQL, all the way to like, Liquid on the front end, HTML and CSS. And then, started putting into practice like kind of what my thesis was and what my thinking was in terms of a potential opportunity in the, e-commerce space broadly and Shopify in particular. And then been running that ever since 2021. And so, and I can dive in further in terms of like what that is, but it involves, application development as well as mergers and acquisitions of e-commerce applications and Shopify applications. So.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I love it when people say, "Oh, sometimes I start a company, sometimes I join a company." It's like that's so cool that you can just, decide which route you want to take. Other folks, it can feel very daunting to even consider starting a business, much less several. So, way to
Yeah,
go.
don't get me wrong. It's daunting. Like it doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's still terrifying. And I'm still awake, at 3 a.m. several nights, like thinking about all the stuff that like, kind of falls on you. And so I would say that you get different tools to deal with the like pressure and anxiety the more you do it, but it like never goes away. It's always
Sure.
terrifying. So
Copy. Now, Taylor, you and Griffin have known each other for a little while now. Can you remind me how you guys first met?
Yeah, we first met. I want to say it was Jonathan Kennedy used to run a kind of like a, I don't know, kind of like a paid Shopify expert directory kind of type thing called Partner League, and so we kind of connected over that, and actually, was really nice just because it was really helpful for me. I kind of consider Griff a bit of a mentor because I get to bother him with questions all the time, and he hasn't become annoyed enough yet to stop responding to my calls and stuff. And so, but I did a little bit of work for him too in the past. And he still wanted to again answer my questions and stuff. So that was really cool. We've just kind of stayed in touch ever since. I don't think the Partner League is around anymore.
yeah, I don't think
kind
so.
of kind of bounced out of it after a while. But that was a really, really positive, relationship that came out of that for me, at least. So that was beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely found there were a lot of Shopify developers like Taylor that were very experienced on like the Liquid front end side of things, but like the whole kind of back end API application side was kind of a new world for them. And I had obviously come from the opposite side, which is like large enterprise applications, building massive systems, things like that. And so it was kind of interesting because when I first got started in Shopify in the ecosystem, there was very much a gap between what I thought were complex things and what I thought were hard things, and like what brands and merchants thought were like complex and hard things. And so like being able to kind of like address that with like very straightforward functionality is really nice, and being able to like help people and get what they want done and help them move their businesses along is super nice. And being able to help Taylor as he has questions. And don't get it wrong, like Taylor and I talk about a lot of different stuff. He helps me a lot as well. He actually just helped me talk through
pretty generous.
A new product service that we're launching this year likely. And so yeah, it's a little more give and take than Taylor lets on. So
Yeah,
I
I appreciate
appreciate
you were
that.
nice too.
That's it. Yeah. But well, so it has been nice to kind of go back and forth with that me because being primarily front end, and the two of you I know you're both pretty big on Ruby too. I don't know, Griff, if you kind of have as strong of a preference for Ruby as Karl does, to the point that he likes to bash on JavaScript whenever he gets a chance. But I don't know if you want to talk about like tech preferences or anything like that you have as well, because I know you have a very, very long, and very prolific history with a lot of different kinds of tech. You're very comfortable kind of jumping in and out of different things, but I don't know if you really lean one way or another. I know we've talked about Ruby quite a bit, but I don't know if you have a preference there at all, kind of type thing.
I have opinions about like what are good and bad things, but over my career, I've done pretty much everything that you can imagine. So I got my start with Visual Basic. Even before that, a little bit of C++, a little bit of Pascal. I was an early bloomer in high school in the 90s and that kind of stuff. And so transitioned into when I started doing work professionally, it was Visual Basic and Java. So enterprise on both sides. And then, once a lot of the more kind of scripting languages began to graduate more into, kind of like more and more functionality, I moved, I started doing stuff in Python and Django, Ruby on Rails, PHP. I built a bunch of mobile applications at one point, so experience in iOS and Android. I have various degrees of experience in different ones, at different times. There was a time in which like I was like a hardcore .NET developer, and like I knew, very, very deep internals about how like garbage collection worked and the runtime and things like that. And then, transitioning, I just started taking a much more pragmatic stance around kind of like, what's the best solution for this, like ideally. And I think over my career, kind of like working with engineers and then doing my own stuff, I think people put a lot of emphasis on starting things and writing code. And they completely forget that most code is read like 100 times more than it's written. And the maintenance life of code is exponentially larger than like the writing and the creation of the code. And so I tend to put a bigger emphasis on like, what's going to make this easier 6 months from now, 12 months from now for people to maintain and change and evolve and update. And that's kind of like the focus on like when I'm making tech decisions. It's like, we could do this like cool 0.1 version of this framework. And like, I'm sure we'd get up and running quicker today. But like in 6 months when the customer or the user needs to change something, like what is that going to look like? And so, I bash on JavaScript and front end people all the time because they've largely wanted congratulations for solving problems that they themselves created. But in general, it's just like whatever's the simpler, most boring thing, I usually tend to go with because, the problems are solved, the issues are out there with solutions. Like, let's just get, everybody get the work done and get home to see our kids kind of thing. So,
I think that's a good status of most veteran programmers that I've ever met. It's about the ability to withstand shiny object syndrome. So,
Yeah. There's just an arc, I think, in a developer's career. I don't know if everyone hits this or not, but where you just go from the younger in your career, not necessarily age, but younger in your career, just everything's exciting, everything's hardcore. Then you pull back a little bit and you're like, it's more about the productivity and the longevity of what I'm working on. And if I can choose technologies and approaches that will promote that, then I'll do it. Because why? Why not? So, and that's where I hate on the JavaScript framework so much because, like, well, if you change them every 6 months, that's not that's going to be difficult to keep up with. Whereas, anyway, enough of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of code bases out there sitting on Angular, early versions of Angular that are effectively like, in rough shape now because like of the decisions. And it goes on and on too. It's like on-page SEO and things like that. Like I saw an entire generation of front-end developers basically resolve all the problems that we solved over the first like 15 years of the internet for no real like demonstrable like progress. It's like the problems that we deal with today are the same problems that we were dealing with previously. It's just like, well, what have we gained? So that's my old man take.
Well, that's the wise take. So, but speaking of the wisdom and those sorts of things and tech leanings, things of that nature, we were really interested in talking about that big shift where you kind of went from, and you kind of highlighted a little bit and kind of gives a little bit of insight as to shifting from kind of like the custom app route, and then starting to focus a little bit more on building public apps. And so, we've got a little bit of insights there. But as far as, maybe some of the positioning that you had to do, that more so led from initially getting invested in custom apps because you were working directly with some of these merchants. They needed something maybe more custom than what was available with a public offering through the services you were just offering at that time. What kind of started you off in custom apps, I guess, on Shopify initially?
Yeah, so it's a good question. What I found, my kind of thesis going in, and over my career, I've been like a consulting CTO,
Mhm.
which I know is like very fashionable right now, like the whole fractional CTO thing.
The fractional CTO, yeah.
But like, I built a practice like 10 years or so ago called a part-time CTO around that very concept. And so
Mhm.
like the issue, and I ran that for like 3 or 4 years, and I helped, maybe 4 or 5 dozen different companies of different sizes over that time. And, the thing that people don't, I guess, acknowledge 100% is like the gap between like functionality and like useful to the customer, right?
Mhm.
And so like in any software development or system or whatever, there's always a gap between like, okay, it's built and it's usable. Now we need to throw users in front of it, and like what are the special
Mhm.
things that they need. And so, I obviously I'm more familiar with that on the custom app side from the ground up, based on my work with other companies. But when I got to Shopify, what I found was the exact same issue in just a slightly different manner. So we all know that like Shopify makes it easy to get started. But I
Mhm.
think what a lot of brands run into is like there's a gap between when you sign up for Shopify and you get that first theme installed and like when it's ready to like process orders.
Mhm.
There's subscriptions, there's fulfillment, there's shipping, there's, payments, there's all these different things that you need to kind of wire up and configure. And, there's oftentimes a gap because, maybe someone is in a particular category or industry that requires just like a little bit specific stuff, right? There's just like a little
Mhm.
bit, maybe they need a certain bundle created or something. And so, what I found was Shopify makes it really easy to do that first 80%, but then almost like slams the door shut for most people on that like
Right.
last 20%.
Mhm.
Um,
So it's one size fits all, except when it doesn't.
yeah, and they have a very robust API, and it's always like being
Mhm.
added to and things like that. But the learning curve is large in terms of not just the API. I think most people could probably, most developers could probably figure something out there, but certainly not as a merchant. Like you're not going to like dive in and start
Sure.
understanding GraphQL. Um, and even if you did, there's still the whole like, how do I run an app? Where do I host it? Like, how do I
Mhm.
process webhooks? Like, how do I make calls? What happens when the app goes down? What do I need to monitor for memory? All these other things that like nobody cares about, right? They're
Right.
we used to call them they're called like the lilies. I don't know if you guys ever heard that term, but like in enterprise computing, it's all the lilies. It's scalability, observability.
No.
It's like all of these like, words that go into like everything around the application. And so, what I found was merchants needed something to kind of bridge that gap.
Mhm.
And custom apps are the easiest to go because you can just whip up a custom app and throw it up there.
Mhm.
But eventually, as you guys know, like Shopify closed the door on that, right? Very quickly. Like everything had to go through, the App Store process. Even if you weren't releasing the application, it still had to kind of go through that process. And so, you could say the transition was, uh, obvious. You can also say it was like forced on you because like you really didn't have a choice.
Mhm.
Because I would start working with brands and merchants, and I would help them, and I'd find this like weird custom app that somebody built for them 2 years ago to process one little thing, and now they needed to change that little thing, and it wasn't possible for either
Yep.
technical reasons or Shopify policy reasons or whatever, right? And so, you kind of had to by hook or by crook be forced into that kind of like, more public app route, even if you weren't selling the app.
Mhm.
And when you say you still have to go through the App Store with considerations of those sort of things, that's something I'm not familiar with. I've written a few custom apps, but my experience has always been that there was no review needed by Shopify or any of that sort of thing. Has that changed recently?
So it depends on like how you go about it. So Shopify they make it a lot easier on you if you just decide to do a public app that's unlisted. Like everything gets a lot easier just from the onset. The review process is simpler. It's a little bit more straightforward. You get access to like, better support, right? Things like that. You could still go the custom app route, but in all honesty, I'm not sure why you would do that. Um, just overall, because I think if we've seen anything, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. Shopify changes stuff, and
Mhm.
they change stuff a lot, and they change stuff frequently, and there's frequently a like good rationale for it. But at the end of the day, they are the benevolent dictator, and so whenever I tend to do things for companies, it tends to be I don't do much app development for other companies right now. It's all kind of like our own app development. But when I used to, it was more of just like, let's just go like, the listed route. Let's just go, that. Um, if we even think there's a chance of needing to maintain this long term.
Mhm.
I think the review process is going to throw a lot of people off, but in all honesty, it could also help you a lot too. So
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, because there's some real specific guidelines there, and it probably opens up for, maybe some additional, markets or people, that you could, use there if you did want to go more of the public route. So at least the focus shift for you started custom and then moved more public, mainly because it was just the best way that you could serve existing customers, really, right? Is that kind of the thought process there? Is why the
yeah,
shift?
yeah, I would say sort of too. I mean, look, at the end of the day, like Shopify wants everything to run through them. Like,
Mhm.
let's just read the tea leaves. And so, yes, you could still do the custom app stuff, and yes, you can still do everything you need from like create your own app, get your own credentials, things like that. But
Mhm.
like, I found that the API support as well as like the SDK support. So if you're going to use like the official, Ruby SDK at the time, or the Ruby gem, if you're going to use like the Node stuff, just everything was easier if the app was just public, right?
Mhm.
Like everything just tended to work a little easier, or otherwise you'd end up with these like weird bugs that like nobody could
Mhm.
explain, and like there was no help for it because all the documentation was around like public apps this and public apps that. So it really just became expedient because I couldn't really come up with a reason to like not do that stuff.
Mhm.
Everybody's going to be different. I'm sure everybody's going to have their own thinking and their own rationale about it. I just think it's easier if you just go that route because frankly, it wouldn't shock me if like new custom apps are prohibitive at some point in the future.
Mhm.
Honestly, because like we've already seen, Shopify cut off private apps, and we've seen Shopify limit access to customer data, right? And like do all these sorts of things that kind of push you towards one style of application. So like, you know, why not do it from the start?
Yeah. So was the lift significant to move from custom apps to public apps? You talked about having to now we're having to fold in, right, like Shopify's review process, even if the app's unlisted. Was that a significant lift or move to be able to do that, or did you see some benefits to that? I guess so. The negatives of the change itself. What did that look like, and then what kind of other benefits there might have been there?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, it's partly the lift was adhering to a lot of the policies that Shopify puts forth.
Mhm.
Access to certain data, access to certain scopes, things like that. I think the lift isn't that complex because, as we all know, if you get on Shopify, not Ruby on Rails, but Shopify Rails, everything's just easier. Like if you try and fight their command line, if you try and fight their tooling, if you try and fight their prescribed way of doing it, everything gets just exponentially harder. And so, you know, I don't see a lot of upsides in custom apps these days.
Mhm.
With a big asterisk, like there's always exceptions, yada yada. But like,
Sure.
just do an unlisted public app, and like, yes, you have to go through a review process before you can use it, but if you have enough planning and frankly, you're doing the same best practices that Shopify wants you to do in custom apps anyway, it's when you get into like crossing that line of like, well, Shopify doesn't really want you touching that scope, or Shopify doesn't really want you like doing this. Honestly, that stuff's going to get shut down anyway, like in the future.
Yeah.
It's just so why not, to my point earlier, like, why not just make it easier on yourself long term and just bite the bullet now?
Yep. Get ahead of it.
Yeah.
I know we touched on tech stacks a little bit already when we all hated on JavaScript, Taylor included. But as you continue looking forward to how you approach building apps for clients and things like that, and as we start to see companies like Gadget, some other no-code or different solutions, what is your preferred approach, and what things have you tried that you found interesting, helpful? Just love to hear what your thoughts are around that whole area.
Yeah, I tend to go boring and straightforward. So like, Heroku is a great, application environment to build and throw up apps. It's low maintenance from a, long-term standpoint. It's relatively affordable compared to like hiring and maintaining a dev, because like what a lot of people don't fully understand is, much like my comment before about the, code is written once but read many times. Code is deployed once but maintained like forever. The problem is that like, that's all well and good for the developer, but at some point the developer probably like moves on to another project, and the customer now has like this application that, like, what do they do with, right? And so the last thing you want is like a complex server, or something that is like obtuse or opaque for them to kind of like either manage themselves, probably not, the most likely scenario, or frankly like transition somebody in. And you're just more likely to find someone that knows the basics of more generally accepted hosting, more generic hosting, than like a specific tool like Gadget. I've used tools and toolkits like that in the past for various things. There's toolkits to build mobile apps that abstract away, iOS and Android. All right, there's Red Foundry, there's Flutter, there's React Native, there's all this kind of stuff. And for the most part, they just end up being like a lot more trouble than they're worth, because they're always trailing behind whatever the implementation of what you're doing is. And so, if it's Shopify, there's always some gap between like what Shopify supports and what, not Gadget in particular, but like just companies like that broadly, like what they support. There's always some limit in terms of APIs or plugins or something like that. And then as well, there's always a cost associated with too, because they're abstracting away and encapsulating, their hosting costs, and then they're adding some sort of margin on top of that. And so now you're learning a tool, you're learning, a specific thing. And then, lastly, like it or not, I've been around the block. I've seen these companies go out of business, like, because they start with business models that are very nice and friendly and like, hey, come build on us. Like, we're super cheap. We're in the Discord all the time and yada, yada. And then just as soon as they get bigger, or they don't get big enough and they raise some funds and they can't continue to grow, they end up kind of flaming out. And so that's my broad comment. Obviously, there's specific companies, there's specific exceptions, yada, yada. That'll always be the exception to the rule. But I'm kind of at the point where I don't want to have to keep trying it out, right? I don't want to have to keep finding it, right? I don't want to have to keep seeing if this time is going to be different, right? Like, you just get to the point where it's like slow and steady wins the race. And if you can pick stuff that is going to be around in a year, 2 years, 5 years for these customers, like, I think that's the smart move. And as long as you can kind of balance the complexity and the costs, I the most longest term thing would be to just throw up a Linux server with Apache. Don't do that. Like, nobody's going to like maintain their own Linux server with Apache, right? So like, there is a balance. Like, you got to use your own judgment, but I would say lean more onto the side of like including that maintainability and long-term focus in like whatever choices that you're making.
I think that's one of the things that we often either don't anticipate when we work with clients, or don't adequately communicate. Like, if you are helping a client develop a custom or unlisted public app, whatever, there's a whole world that comes with that they don't necessarily anticipate. To them, it's all about what's the delivery and how much are you charging me for getting this to the customer. But then there's the years of this thing has to keep running, and it's not cheap, because like when you have a plumber come out to fix a simple thing at your house, there's all the overhead that comes with getting the plumber to your house to begin with. So as a developer, if you've got someone that has an app that they've asked you to build, they expect you to maintain it down the road, even if it's just little things, right? Just that mental shift, the task shifting that comes with a cost. And so,
1,000%. I mean, we saw this.
yeah,
I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of this, but like with all the custom themes that people do, or the headless stuff that everybody was like really big on, and then the developer leaves, and they're kind of stuck with like a giant pile of React code that they don't know how to change, and now they want to add a button, and like you know, they can't really do it without hiring another developer. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe you got what you wanted specifically at the start, but like it's not really working out for you. And so pushing people to kind of like, that's the first thing that I do with any customer or any client, you know, frankly. If we, you know, when I was doing a lot more consulting, it was, okay, how do we use what's already here? How do we use the, you know, like here's a perfect example of what, you know, theme developers and Shopify developers should be doing. Almost every Shopify 2.0 theme nowadays has a custom CSS section of the section in the theme editor. If you have to write custom CSS, drop it in there. Don't put it in the CSS, the raw CSS files, because as the theme gets upgraded, as soon as you do that, as soon as you modify the theme files, you can't do the upgrades. And so then the customer moving forward, like, isn't able to like get the new features. And like you said, you know, Karl, the new overhead and the stuff that gets fixed, and the you know, the new features and stuff like that. And so that's just a perfect example of like, lean into the long term. Even if you think you have to do something custom, like, do it in a way that's maintainable.
Yeah.
It's almost like,
and that's been built out more too. The CSS is a great example that hasn't been a great option because it didn't even do something as simple as support media queries. But that's, now they've built in support for that. And so it just comes in with settings on your theme. So yeah, definitely a great option there. Sorry, Karl.
I was just going to say, sometimes when I'm working on a theme, it almost feels a little bit like the prisoner's dilemma in terms of like, all right, I can either do the extra work to make sure that this is an easy upgrade path for all the future people, but is there going to be another dev that comes in either in parallel with me or after me that completely screws everything up and makes it hard? So am I the one that does the work, or do I just accept the fact that this is all going to decay into entropy anyways?
Well,
it's a tough place to be.
I have a little surprise for you, Karl. You are the dev that comes in and screws it up for someone else.
That's right. No.
That's the honest truth. For every developer thinks that like the people there before were idiots and the people there after them are idiots, and it's just like, why do they make those decisions, right?
Yep.
And sometimes you realize via get blamed that you were the idiot 5 years ago.
Yep.
Like, oh no, that was me.
The killer is me. Yep.
That's right. So, calls coming from inside the house.
That's, well, and that's, I like the thought process on that, because even from the theme standpoint, you know, I've talked to folks with that whole idea of like this technical debt of, you know, people moving away from headless because headless was huge and great, but it's like, hey, like, even to do simple things, you know, just understand going in what you're getting yourself into. And we've seen a big shift of people moving from headless back to Shopify native or whatever, or at least hosted on there. And the same with custom apps. When I'm talking to people about shops, you know, a lot of my work as a freelance dev here comes from a lot of these plus shops who got a $30,000 to $50,000 custom theme built for them from scratch by, you know, some agency or something like that, and then they need other stuff done, and the agency will continue to work with them on a retainer with like a year-long commitment minimum for $3,000 a month or something like that. And they don't want that. Like, they're like, no, we don't need necessarily something like that. And so people don't always realize what that entails anytime you're going custom. So that's a real good thought process as far as trying to keep those things in mind. So switching gears a little bit, but talking still about like the custom to the public app route and those sorts of things. You know, I know we wanted to talk a little bit too about the marketing aspect. That's not something that comes as easy to a lot of developers as well. But so a lot of your custom app work obviously was probably directly with merchants, you know, specific merchants through services and things of that nature. When you're starting to move more into the public app realm, that's not as scalable, right? If you're trying to like promote things from a public app perspective. So did you have to change things there as well, if we want to talk about the marketing side of things?
I'm not sure I followed. Like, what wasn't scalable, and like, what would you have to change?
Well, it's just from the standpoint of, or maybe it didn't. So like, if you're building a lot of custom apps, that's primarily through like kind of like services, right? Where you're working directly with those merchants, you're building out a custom solution for them. So moving to the public app route, I know you had mentioned like the route instead of going the kind of like the unlisted app route. So we're not trying to promote directly through necessarily the app store or anything like that. But has anything changed about how you're marketing those either services or that app or those products when you're trying to work with other merchants?
Yeah, so I think I'm following. So I think it's helpful to think about it in slightly different terms. So I would say
Mm.
like you're either selling your services or you're selling a product, and those
Right.
are two radically different things. And so when you move
Hmm.
from selling a service like consulting or whatever you're doing, if it's theme development or custom app development, it doesn't matter. You're trading dollars for hours, and you
Hmm.
move into a product. It's a totally different business. Everything has to change.
Hmm.
Like your cost structure changes, your marketing changes, your development priorities change. Everything does. So it's a different business. And so this is why a lot of companies that are consulting companies build the same thing for a customer, and they think like, well, we'll just throw it up on the app store and see
Hmm.
what'll happen, or we'll just make a product out of it, right? This isn't unique to Shopify. Like consulting companies and agencies have been doing this forever.
Hmm.
And the problem is that 99.9% of them fail because the economics and the cost structure are just radically different.
Hmm.
Because you're getting paid quicker and more money with higher dollar amounts for the custom services work, and you have to kind of like go down market immediately to do the app stuff. You were making $5,000 a month from a customer retainer, and now you're trying to
Hmm.
sell something for $5, $10, $100 a month to a customer, right? And so you have to get you know an order of magnitude or two more customers just to even replace that, and like the amount of work necessary is way more than the number of hours that you were selling in the past. And so
Hmm.
you know I think people have to be like really intentional about what they're trying to do when they do that kind of stuff. And if you're trying to start a business, you're going to need to start a business first and then figure out, how to do it. Don't start with the app and just say like, well, I'll throw the app out there and then I'll build a business around it. I think that's the wrong approach. You gotta
Yeah.
look into it and saying like, I want to start a business, and I think this app could be part of that business, and how are we going to make that successful?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's good thoughts, especially around the whole dilemma about being upmarket versus having to shift to get the customer base for your new public app. That's tricky. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's
it's not
tough
to
too
say,
because on the one side, oh, sorry,
oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, the appeal of being upmarket like that is you do a certain amount of work and you get the bigger return, but there's also the fear of losing that one or two whales, right, that are keeping you going. Whereas if you do successfully make the shift down market and suddenly you've got 100 or several hundred of the lower paying customers, at least the odds of them all picking up and leaving you at once are much less, but it doesn't make it any easier per se.
No, in a lot of ways it's harder. In a lot of ways it's easier, right? Like there's just different trade offs. And that's not to say that you can't, like our portfolio that we've got has both types of applications that, on the one side, they're enterprise focused, high dollar amounts, annual contracts. On the other side of the market, they're more kind of product led growth. A lot of things more self service. It's lower dollar amounts, but it's like higher volume of customers. Um, and that's the other part too, is that you have to make sure that the problem that you're solving is built around the customers that can pay for it, right? Like if you're
Hmm.
trying to solve $100 problem, you need to find $100 customers. If you're trying to solve a $10,000 problem, you have to find $10,000 customers. Like, you can't jump back and forth between those two things.
Hmm.
And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of app developers try and go into the market and do is they try and do either too much and charge too little, or they try and do too little and charge too little. In
Hmm.
terms of like, you know, their little widget or their little application is $5 to $10 a month. And it's like, well, like most businesses don't make decisions like that. They're not going to get, and this is like kind of how we built the thesis around our business is no merchant wants to deal with 25 different apps. that each do a
Right.
little sliver of functionality and charge them $5 to $10 a month, right? And so, the more that you can do from a functional standpoint and the more, specific and targeted you can be, that'll allow you to kind of like go after the right customers from a marketing standpoint.
Hmm. So
That's a
that's
good point.
maybe a thought too. So how do you, as far as like tactics go, what sorts of things do you do to find customers? Because I think, at least when we've talked, you do a little bit of mix of actually going to in-person events too. In addition to, I'm sure there's plenty of like online efforts and things like that. I don't know if you can give kind of like a high overview of maybe like different ways that you have found to be useful with attracting different kinds of customers based on the kind of apps that you're looking to provide, or products, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. So it's trite, but like you go where the customers go and the customers are.
Yeah.
And so like in some industries, a lot of our customers are in in-person events and they're offline and they're not like traditional marketing based, digital marketing tactics aren't going to work on them. Right. We have some customers that check email once a week. So some sort of like, 5-day drip campaign is not going to like move the needle for them.
Yeah.
That's why it's really important to focus, especially if you're starting out. Like if you're starting out and you're dropping an app in the app store, try to focus with functionality, but definitely focus with target. Like if you're building,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're building a generic app, it's a email service provider, it's an SMS service provider, something like that. Make it the best text message application for flower delivery people or knitting stores or some sort of focus so that you can at least target your effort and your resources. Because if you just kind of
Mm-hmm.
spray and pray and say you're for everybody, you're not gonna have much luck. It's going to be extremely extremely difficult without significant amounts of funding. Because even the high level generic applications, the ones that you hear about, like the routes and the um, loop and the Klavios and all that kind of stuff, like they were generic, but they spent a lot of money initially on marketing, paid spend,
Mm-hmm.
sponsorships, things like that. So if you want to be general and you can do that, great. Like go do that. But if you're just trying to like be turn a side project into a little bit of product income, you got to focus. Like you got to figure out what that
Mm-hmm.
focus area is. And I'll also
Yeah.
say that like the more you focus and the more you target, the more you can charge. Honestly, like the dollars go
Yeah.
up.
Mm-hmm. So trying to go niche. So you wouldn't start necessarily with when you're trying to build a product for somebody. You would want to start with your niche and then start looking at the functionality, or like the chicken or the egg kind of type thing. Like I think a lot of people start off with, I have this great idea, and then they try to go find customers for that, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
ideally, you would want to have the customers or some sort of niche already targeted, and then try to figure out what functionality is missing.
So you can definitely do it that way. And if you have access
Mm-hmm.
to customers, like I tell people all the time that are just getting started. I told someone the other day they were debating on that exact question, and I said, answer the question of where your first 100 customers will likely come from, and then go in that
Mm-hmm.
route. If you think it's going to
Yeah.
be build the product and then you've got people waiting for it, great, do that. If you think it's going to be you're really close to a set of customers because that's where your services are based, then target it on that. The other thing, honestly, that I would say is get them to pay immediately.
Yeah.
Like, don't wait. And even if somebody tells you like they gladly pay $50, $100
Yeah.
a month for that, great. Take a deposit. Try and get them, because the conversation doesn't start until you ask for money. And until you do that, people will tell you a lot of different things. I'll just be honest with you. Not because they're trying to be nefarious or they're trying to lead you on. It's just like priorities change, priorities shift. Like it may be a problem for them, but it may be problem number 6 on their list, and only the top 5 get
Yeah.
funding, right? So have that conversation early, which is the thing I think that a lot of developers are reticent to do. Like they want to put their heads down and build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are really good points. I found my own experiences with apps and SaaS, like if you're approaching this and you're a developer, there's a couple things that come into play. Like one is there's that stage of your career where like you're just wondering, will someone actually ever pay me money for something I make? That's not like a direct job, right? And so then you tend to like lowball things. You tend to be very hesitant to even make the ask. And then you get further along in your career and you're like, I just need the money because I'm not going to get burned again. So give me the money and I'll build this thing for you, right? And that's, I think, a healthier place to be because it makes sure everyone's honest on both sides. Like you're honest, you're going to go through with it. They're honest, you're actually going to pay with it. Um, yeah, so it's a good point.
It's a balance though too, because like you could very quickly end up in a dollars for hours type
Yep.
situation if you're getting your customers. So it's always a balance, right? Like we have I mentioned earlier, like we've got this big initiative that we're building into one of our applications, and we've got an anchor customer for it because it's the best way to get feedback and proof and a little bit of cash up front to help subsidize it. But as we go through the product management, we're very careful on like how we build it to make sure that we're not just building the best thing for them and only them. We want to build something that is scalable and functional that we can bring other customers on. And that's, you're only going to get better at that the more you do it. It's the kind of thing of like, you just need to get the reps in and make some mistakes.
It's always
one question
to hear. That's the big thing. Always putting the reps in. Like no one wants to hear that. Griff, where's the 30 days to success story? Like that's what people want.
I always use a quote from a famous bodybuilder who's like Mr. Olympia, and they asked him one time, they're like, "What do you think about all these young guys coming in wanting to take your title?" And he just looked at the camera and he's like, "Everybody wants to be a bodybuilder. Nobody wants to lift heavy weights." And it's like everybody wants the belt and the recurring revenue and stuff like that, but like nobody actually wants to do like the grunt tough work on the back end, and like that's unfortunately what you got to do.
Yep.
Especially the sales and marketing part. I did have one more question, kind of back to our previous section, but I also don't want to derail us too far. So I sense we're getting maybe at a time to shift. Is there anything else you wanted to ask along this line, Taylor?
No, I don't think so. I covered like the big ones that I wanted to ask.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, then circling back real quick, and this might be completely obvious, and I'll be exposed as the fraud that I am. But as we were talking about maintainability, it had me thinking a little bit about what I've been learning in terms of functions. And I love to be educated if I'm wrong about this. So one of the things that it occurred to me is that the shift for Plus stores, and I'm getting very specific now, from the line item scripts, where it's all in Shopify, it's an app, right? You access it through there, you can see the code, even test the code, run little scenarios against it, to the Shopify functions. Now we're writing code in using the CLI to generate app skeletons and using the CLI to push the code up into Shopify. That's it, right? The merchant has no access to that. And so if the developer parts ways with you and you don't have a copy of that Shopify function and the know-how to use the CLI, like the path for future upgrades and maintainability is pretty much closed, if I'm not mistaken. Am I missing something around that scenario?
No, you're 100% correct. I mean, one of the first things, when I was a consulting CTO, a lot more full time, that's one of the biggest things I would go into is help manage development teams and help manage and build and kind of like steer projects. And like the very first thing that I did for everything was like source control for everything that's under the organization's ownership that they have access to. Backups for everything, documentation for kind of like where the passwords are and like what the functions are. And so, unfortunately, merchants don't know what they don't know. And that's the function that I used to play a lot is I used to help merchants say, like, you really need to be answering these questions and let's put them under here. Even just showing someone, we've all stepped into a Shopify store that has 20 themes that are all marked like copy, -1, new site, right? All these different things, and nobody can remember where the new functionality was or the new design, and it gets overwritten and yada yada. And the very first thing I used to do for customers and merchants was connect it to GitHub, build that integration under a repository that they own. And that's like first and foremost, because even if you don't do anything in GitHub, you have a backup, a constant, continuous backup of everything you're doing. You could really get into, I used to create a dev branch and a main branch, and then propagating theme changes across the different themes was as simple as just pushing it to the different branches, and then it's auto deployed and you're done, right? There's no like, oh, I published this and I didn't mean to, and I overwrote this, and now my settings are messed up. And, so you're 100% right, Karl. Like, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of merchants out there that are going to realize what pushing stuff to the Shopify CDN entailed. And if they don't have access to that developer, it's gone. Like, you can't pull it from the CDN, at least as far as Shopify supports right now. Maybe they change it in the future. I don't know. But you're 100% right. Building that infrastructure so that you have what you need moving forward is critical, but most merchants don't know that.
Because even the stuff that's being pushed by the CLI to the CDN, I mean, it's the compiled WebAssembly, isn't it? It's not even helpful at that point.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But I don't know. I mean, we're getting to like projections here. You could probably like decompile the assembly back into JavaScript because it's
as a merchant.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, could you do that? Possibly, but I don't know.
Maybe.
No, I mean, like Shopify could do that. Like, they could have something that says like, we're going to disassemble and reverse engineer the stuff, and like maybe that's possible. But I wouldn't want to maintain disassembled code. I've had to do that in the past, and it's not fun. So.
Yeah. Well, sorry to be a downer, but thanks for confirming my suspicion.
No, I mean, it really is the reason, not for nothing, but I think the reason I've been successful, whether it's services or products or whatever in the past, is like, I really have a lot of empathy for the non-technical parts of the world. And there's a lot of, let's just say it, there's a lot of developers that have like a smug entitlement that like they don't want to be bothered. They want to
Taylor.
And like, I didn't want to say it.
Don't call me out. I'm
and so everything I do is focused on like, look, they're trying to solve a problem. Like, they don't want to learn, the intricacies of Ruby 3 versus Ruby 3.1. They're just trying to sell some stuff, and they're trying to solve a problem, right? And so how do we make that easy and less impactful for them? And I think if more developers like kind of took that mindset, I think things would get a lot easier. It would just get a lot less sexy for developers, and like not many of them want that because like there's no incentive for them to do that, right? They're highly paid, they get to do what they want, they answer to really nobody, and like they can just move on to the next client.
Mm-hmm.
So, not anybody on this call, obviously, but
No. Well, let's wrap this up then. No, that was well put, Griffin. I appreciate that. And if you are a developer listening to this, have some empathy for your customer, whether it be an agency or a merchant, because it's not a good spot to be in when things go wrong and there's no one to help.
I can't tell you, just like anecdotal evidence, I can't tell you how many times like developers don't discuss the trade-offs of certain requests. And so I can't tell you like how many times a merchant, I've been in projects like this where the merchant like wanted the button green, whatever. And it took the developer like 3 days to, redesign something or redo this X, Y, and Z. And if they wanted it in orange, it would have taken like an hour, right? Trumped up example, obviously. But like, the merchant would have been like, I would have taken the orange. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I would just, you didn't tell me that.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, have a discussion with like what they're trying to accomplish and really get a good understanding of it. And like, you'll find that everything can get a lot simpler if it's a lot quicker and a lot easier for everyone involved. So,
right.
Well, Taylor, do you want to transition now to the community stuff and changelog?
Well, I mean, we're just a little bit over an hour now, so I think we had talked about maybe like bop around on that. The only thing, maybe I'll just abbreviate what I was going to cover. So for the in the community section, something that I thought was really interesting here, and we'll post it up. I won't do the whole screen share and stuff like that. I don't know if y'all saw, but Harley had posted on Twitter about this whole deal where Shopify, ShopPay was being used on Everlane's website. So Everlane is not running Shopify or anything like that. So they are using ShopPay kind of similar to like these accelerated checkouts. So they're accepting ShopPay on a shop that is not on Shopify. So they are continuing to extend that out a little bit more. So that's a step further even than, headless and all these other things or what have you. So just really interesting stuff there. A follow up on a previous note that we had made as well. for collab requests, developers were not happy about the change where the new requirement on all shops is that a pin or a code is required when sending a collab request. And this happened even for developers who had apps installed on that shop. So that was a huge problem for folks. People were not happy about it. And Shopify did listen to the outcry, the feedback there, and they did update that. So now if your app is already installed, the new collaborator code will be required. For us Steam devs working with brands and stuff like that, I still have to get a code every time though. So, and that's as it should be. So.
All right. Thank you, Taylor, for those updates. Those were always helpful.
Yeah.
Let's do our end of our picks of the week. Griffin, did you have a chance to think about one yet? Need a moment?
Give me a moment. You guys go first. I'll come back to one.
All right. I'll go first.
Get it, Carl.
Taylor just did his section. Yeah. So my pick of the week is Lime Wash. So I talk about this quite a bit here on the show. I'm trying to finish my basement, and we've got some issues. One of them is the walls don't stay completely dry all the time, which is unfortunate because it's a new basement. That's a whole other thing. But what I'm experimenting with is ways to spruce it up a little bit while we're kind of in process, figuring out what's next for us. And so you don't want to coat cement block or any concrete with a vapor impermeable barrier like a latex paint or some of those interior, even like Drylock products. So you want the block to be able to breathe to the inside so you can capture that moisture and remove it from the air, the dehumidifier, whatever. So Lime Wash, old school way of brightening up wood, cement, whatever. It's really cheap, really easy to make. And I did a test where I took a block and lime wash it, and then I also put it in a tray and let water whip into it to see what would happen. And so it just darkens in color, which I wanted to know because I wanted to see if I'd be able to tell if it was still having moisture issues if I lime washed it, which is really the goal here. So yeah, that's my experiment. Lime washing. Gonna lime wash my basement. You can get it from animal feed stores, hydrated lime, mix a little water with it, and you're good to go.
Wow.
Huh.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. It's cheap.
Handy home improvement stuff for those of you with basements and all sorts of other applications. So
that's right.
Nice.
All right. How are you, Taylor?
My pick of the week is going to be YouTube Premium. So as much as people hate the idea of having to pay for something like that, I've been on YouTube Premium for a very long time. But a lot of people don't realize they have a family plan as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot more cost effective. I'm actually on a family plan with like my brother-in-law and his wife and stuff like that. So we kind of like split the costs already. It's only like $20 a month or whatever kind of type thing. But obviously that part's nice. So not having to watch ads and stuff like that. On YouTube, I learn everything on YouTube from little coding tips to how to fix my washer, car part replacement stuff or whatever. Yep. Just watching a quick YouTube video and being able to crank something out or whatever. So in my mind, it's money well worth paying because I do occasionally, I've got different profiles set up where I'm not signed into it, and it is brutal having to watch all those ads. And so at the same time too, I'm not a huge fan of Spotify from listening to music, and so I listen to YouTube Music, which the nice thing about Premium is that's all ad-free listening. You get downloads, all this other fun stuff too, or whatever. People don't really realize always. They think, oh, YouTube Premium is just, no ads on YouTube, but like that's also a really nice benefit. There's tons of music on there, really helpful to have that as well. And I do like the model of YouTube Premium where still like creators that you really like to watch on YouTube, they're still credited for views. It's not like through ads and stuff like that or what have you. So it's still a good model. They still get credit even when people on Premium aren't served ads but are watching their videos. So I think it's just really well done. It's money I don't mind spending every single month because I think it's super worth it. So
nice. Just charge Griffin $10 a month more.
The YouTube budget. Yeah, my kids are big into YouTube. They watch Minecraft stuff and Roblox stuff just continuously. They've actually figured out how to do the picture-in-picture as they're playing like the Minecraft, which I thought was cool. And yeah, the nice. Premium gets rid of the ads, and so it's just like a much easier experience that you don't have these like crazy weird ads popping up.
100%. Money well spent.
Yes.
All right, Griffin, do you have time?
I do, yeah. So I got two things I'm going to smuggle in here. So first is
nice.
I've been getting into audio, like listening devices and like audio equipment. And there is just a a metric ton of good options out there for like vastly improving your audio when listening to music for like not much money. So there's a really cool company out there called FIO, FIIO, and there's a really cool site called HeadFi that goes into it. But there's all this stuff coming out that is, $50, $100, something like that, and they just vastly improve your listening experience. So, a nice set of wired headphones, a nice like cheap DAC compared to like what comes with your laptop, instantly bumps it up, and it's like a huge upgrade for just like not much money. You could obviously go crazy, and there's like an infinite top end. I don't recommend going that, but like spending $20 on like an Anchor, headphone dongle is money well spent. I just showed my wife my Bose headphones yesterday compared to her AirPods Pro, and like the difference is just insanely night and day. Like the AirPods Pro compared to the Bose headphones or the earbuds is just vastly different. So even if you just do something I'm talking about like wireless. I'm talking about wireless.
Just the in-ears?
Yeah, just the in-ears. It's insane. So don't settle for the AirPods Pro is all I'm saying, please.
Yes.
And then last thing is Godzilla -1. Have you guys seen this?
What?
No.
Okay, so Godzilla -1 is the new Godzilla movie that came out from the company that owns Godzilla. I forget how to pronounce them. Tenso or something like that. They're the ones that have done it for years and years and years. It is a monster movie in name only. It is an amazing, moving story, and like it's the first monster movie that like I was almost in tears for. Like it was just, I highly recommend if it's playing near you or if it's on demand, rent it, watch it with the family.
Nice.
Godzilla's in it, but he's like a means to an end. The real story is about like the people involved. It takes place in post World War II Japan. It's amazing. It's got the cutest kid in the world that you'll ever see. Highly recommend it. Even if you're not a monster movie person, like I said, this is a moving story. So check it out.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it's in theaters. Yeah. That's awesome.
Very, very good.
Well, excellent. I think we'll end it there. Monster movies, headphones, lime wash, whatever it was Taylor mentioned. I can't even remember. So uninspiring. But Griffin, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah.
And if people wanted more information or to get in touch with you, where would be the best place to direct them?
That's a good question. I'm occasionally on Twitter at @GCaprio. I don't really post that much, but if you need to get in touch with me or ask me a question, I'll respond to ats or DMs. Otherwise, I'll drop my email in the show notes with the show, and anybody can reach out. Happy to answer questions about acquisitions, apps, developments, the ecosystem, whatever questions you have.
Thanks.
We didn't even touch on the BigCommerce or the other like non-Shopify stuff outside of this. So if anybody has any questions about that, more than happy to dive into it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you around online.
All right, sounds good, guys.
All right, thank you.